Hey guys, how you doing? No more music. I'll be gone. Hold on, I gotta mute this one. I don't know, I just thought I'd try something new. Turn it on a little bit early and let people kind of wander in here. How are you guys doing tonight? Oh, thanks, Stan. Thanks for sharing it. Appreciate that. You guys ready to play with some pneumatics tonight? Please, if you have any questions, please make sure to post them down below. As you can see, I've got plenty to cover, but if there's something specific you want me to go over, please post it. So, all right, tonight we are going to talk about all things pneumatic. We're going to talk a little bit about compressors. We're going to go into solenoids, the cylinders, the fittings, all the other plumbing that goes into it. We're going to talk about a few other things you can do to make your pneumatics work a little bit better. We'll even talk about a couple alternatives to pneumatics if you want something else to do. So we're going to go through all of that. Ton of information to cover. So we may as well get started. If you want a written version of what we're going to go over tonight, or you want to reference that, or if you learn better that way, I did write for Servo, when was this? November of 2015. So if you're a subscriber, or if you get it online, there's the whole thing, pretty much same thing we're going to go over tonight. So there's that. Hey Steve, hi. Hi Richard, good to see you guys. So we're going to start off, laptop on the side, hold on. There, better. We're going to start off by talking compressors. This is probably the most intimidating part of getting started in pneumatics, I think. Most people struggle with the decision on what kind of compressor to get, how large of compressor to get, and so we're going to go over that first. If you're just getting started, you know, a lot of us have the little pancake compressors around that we use for nailers and everything, you know, small power tools, and that will certainly work to get you started. You know, I prefer the oiled versions of the compressors. You can get oilless, but they're noisier. I don't think they're quite as durable as an oiled one. And the larger ones are going to be oiled anyway, so you may as well go with an oiled one. And as far as size goes, my recommendation is always get what you think you're going to do, double it, and then add a little bit more as far as volume. Because once you get started doing pneumatics, it's really easy to continue to expand and want to continue to expand. So I have got a little pancake compressor that I just use when I'm testing individual props. I don't use it in the haunt at all. But I have two stand-ups, a 20 and a 25-gallon stand-up compressors that I use. I have one set on each side of my yard, and with lines running out to the numerous places. So that works really well for me. One thing with your compressors, though, is you do not want to run them on extension cords. You want to plug them directly into the outlets. And I have dedicated circuits for both of my compressors. So, you know, you can add a little bit of light or two here, but for the most part, those two circuits, all I have on them is the compressor. And I have made the mistake before of plugging Big Red. For those of you who've seen the Big Red video, we got him up and running, tested everything working perfectly before, you know, game time. And then when I went and turned everything on, every time the compressor would kick on, it would reset my controller on Big Red and cause me a world of pain. So until we got that pulled off of that circuit. So it's best to keep them on their own dedicated circuit and not on an extension cord. Yeah. I was very upset, Jerry. Hey, Allison, good to see you. And again, it was something perfect, you know. So how many times have we worked on props in the patio or, you know, the backyard and got them all prepped and they work perfectly, and we go put them out in the yard on Halloween and all of a sudden they don't work. Well, this was a perfect example of it. You know, there's something had changed, and we had added the compressor to the mix, and it was just enough that when it would cycle on to refill, it would kick that just one of my controllers. Big Red's got several different controllers, but it would just kick one, reset one of them, so he quickly got out of sync. So not a good thing. So buy bigger than you think you're going to need. It's always better to buy. I've got my first one. I bought one of the ones from Harbor Freight, the 20-gallon stand-ups, and I'm still using that compressor today. It's held up very well for me, knock on wood. But it was, you know, $100 or around $100 if I remember right. And so, you know, you don't have to spend a lot of money. My second compressor, my 25, the one I really like, my wife got me one of the Craftsman black ones from Sears that's just wonderful. So a lot quieter than my Harbor Freight one, and it's just a fantastic compressor. So, you know, it does pay to, like anything else when we're buying tools, to buy quality, but you certainly can get by with one of those Harbor Freight compressors if that's all you can afford to get started. And again, if you're just getting started, you can get a little pancake compressor and use that for one or two low volume props, and it'll work just fine. But just understand that once you start doing this, you'll probably enjoy the results you get from the props so much that you're going to want to do more, and you'll end up expanding into a bigger compressor. So, and again, the bigger the compressor, the less they're going to cycle over and over to refill. And, you know, if you overload your compressor, if you've got too small of a compressor and it's running all night just trying to keep up, they're not designed to run continuously. They need to have some downtime, and if you run them like that, you know, you'll burn them up. I think Pat has been guilty of burning a compressor up because it was plugged into an extension cord and it was run too far away from his outlet. So make sure to, you know, give them the power they need, so they'll stay happy. So, and Pat reminds me, for those of you, I put on Haunt Forum a link, or I've got a thread on Haunt Forum. I'm the Pneumatics moderator at Haunt Forum. And that thread that I just posted in the comments is the one for the pneumatics. And a lot of great links there to get you started. And even if you've been doing this for a while, there's a lot of great information there. And if you look at, I think the very first one, Pat Dead Things, who just checked in, did a 5 or 6 part video on pneumatics. So I think he does one on compressors, one on solenoids, one on cylinders, a couple others, fittings, then answer some questions. So, you know, there's a really good one too, that you can use that will give you some more information. But again, there's a whole list of things there. If you've got a site that you really like that's got a lot of good information for pneumatics, please post it in that thread so that I can add it to the list. So let us continue on. If no questions on compressors, I don't think so. You resemble that remark. Yes, you do, Pat. Okay, so if there's no questions on compressors, again, I've got a lot of ground to cover, so I'm going to be moving, yeah, thanks, Pat. I'll be moving quite quickly, but if you've got a question, please post it so that I can make sure to get it answered. So pneumatics, everybody, a lot of new beginners feel intimidated by it, and it's not really that difficult to do. It's more like, or it's very much like putting a plumbing system together, and I think Pat uses this, I think this is where I first heard it. But really, that's all you're doing. You're just plumbing for air instead of water, and just like water, we don't want leaks. And it's not really any more complicated than that. We're going to go over a few safety things as far as setting your air pressure to avoid mistakes and avoiding accidents. But it's not that tough to do. You're just pushing air and to certain spots and being able to control it. So the electronic portion of that, you can't send your air directly to your cylinder. So everybody knows this, a cylinder. This is a pneumatic cylinder. Okay. A couple different sizes and styles. We'll talk about those. But in order to control the air to these, you need some form of a solenoid. Let's see if that'll give a label at least. And of course, this is the electronic part that's connected to your controller, whatever you're using. And this is where the air is going to come through. Now, as far as there's a whole variety of different, you can get 2-way, 3-way, 4-way solenoids. My preference, and it's the only thing I buy, is 4-way, 5-port. If you don't need all the ports on this, you can always put a plug in and reduce it down. But this way, all of my stuff is interchangeable. If I have one go down, I can just grab one out of stock, plumb it up the same way, plug it into the prop, and I'm ready to go. So that's what I prefer. The other decision you need to make when you're looking at buying a solenoid, or one of the things, is whether you're going to go 12 volt or 110. If you're going to control this by 12 volt or 110. Just like with the lighting, I recommend going with 12 volt. It's easier to run off of my controllers. I can run it directly off of a Darlington driver, off of one of my control boards, and it's a lot easier, it's a lot safer. So everything I can do in 12 volt, I'm going to do in 12 volt. So that's my preference. One thing, if you do happen to short one of these out, plug 110 into a 12 volt, I won't tell you anything about how that may happen. At least the ones from Fright Props, you can buy replacements for just this front end. I'm not even going to go into how that happened, but anyway, every mistake that you guys may make, I've probably already made, just to let you know. If I haven't, Pat has. So, and we're not afraid to admit it. So again, this is a 4-way 5-port. So there's 2 ports here. Those are the out ports going to your prop. And these 2 here are the exhausts for those ports. And this is your air in. This is going to be coming in from your compressor. Okay? But you can't just run them like this. Somehow you have to have a way to connect your air line to this. They don't just plug in. Now, a lot of people, I buy almost all of my solenoids from either Fright Props or Monster Guts. And the US solenoids are all going to use NPT thread, National Pipe Taper thread. And for those, you're just going to get your fittings the proper size, and they just screw in here. If you're someone that wants to go and save some money, and again, I'm done this too. These are Chinese AirTacs, but they use the BPST threads. They are not interchangeable. They are close, but they are not interchangeable. So if you are going to get these solenoids off of eBay or AliExpress or one of the other many places that they're available, you have to make sure that you get the proper sized fittings for them. And if you're going to mix, now you're going to have 2 complete sets of different fittings. Okay, so just beware of that. This is really important. So you need to know not only what size. As you can see, those are, well, that's a better size. This one is a different size than this size. So you got to find out and get which size is the correct one, and then you have to make sure that you get the correct threads. Fright Props has got a great thing in the tutorials about determining the size, because if you get a 1/4 inch fitting, it doesn't necessarily correspond to a 1/4 inch hole. It's goofy. Anyway, but they've got a great little chart there, and you can just put this up against the little chart, and it tells you exactly what size fitting you want. So, you know, if you've already got this in hand and you don't have the spec sheet, that's a great way to go over there and get the exact size fitting. I know I've gone over there before and checked too. So, so make sure that you get the proper fittings. You have to determine if you want, how many ports you want, and whether it's 12 volt or 110. And again, pick a voltage and stick with it. And I recommend 12 volt. And then, of course, this electrical portion is going to go off and hook into our controller. And then we'll plumb our air to our cylinder in here. And we're going to talk about how to do that. Fittings, make sure to get the right style. Any questions on that? Yeah, well, and I was going to talk about that a little later, Chris, but this is maybe a good spot to talk about plug and play. If you're first just getting into pneumatics, my recommendation is to buy a kit to start off with. And I know Fright Props has got a great little starter kit, and it comes with the proper fittings. You can get it with a controller and everything. And that's a great way to start. Once you see this and you get it in front of you and you plumb it up, it's like, oh, well, it's not as difficult as I thought. But you know, you really want to be able to get started on a positive note. And as far as I've dealt with, that's the best way. See it in front of you, have all the right parts, because there's nothing worse than buying a bunch of parts and going to assemble this, and then all of a sudden things don't come together. So, you know, that's my suggestion. That's what I did. When I first got into this, I bought a kit, and it worked really well. So I'm just getting one of these assembled here. Now, if you haven't worked with putting these style of threaded fittings on, you've never worked with plumbing fittings, a couple things, a lot of them, let me see if I can find one in my box. Oh, that one's... come with the white Teflon tape, or the Teflon tape already installed. Okay, theoretically, you can just thread this in, tighten it down, and it won't leak. Theoretically. In practice, I have found that I still do get some leaks occasionally when just relying on that. So one thing that I was taught, in addition to the white tape, you put a wrap or two of white tape, and then you use some of this. This is T+2 pipe thread sealant. When I've done that, I put both of these on, wait till the next day, till it sets up. I have never had a leak in one of these fittings. Again, knocking on wood. But that was how I was taught, and it's worked real well. So the other thing is, if you've never done this before, when you're installing your Teflon tape, there's, of course, two directions that you can wrap this. I don't know how to explain this in the easiest way. If you do that and you break this off, when you go to thread it into your fitting, it is going to wrap itself tighter. That's what you want you're putting on tape. If you wrapped it the other way, as you tighten this down, the threads would come up here and push that back, and that's not what you want. So you want to wrap it in the direction that's going to thread into your fitting. That makes sense. Now I got too much. So something so simple, and still there's a way that, you know, that works better than the other. How do you know? For the outputs, I like the 1/4 inch. Most of the exhausts are 1/8. You're going to push more air. Again, if you go with the smaller, the 1/8 inch for to go to the prop mark, you're going to be restricting the airflow because it's got a restriction there. It's smaller. Sometimes that doesn't matter, but that's what I usually do. And it works really well for me. So that's tape. Any questions on putting these fittings in? And again, which size to use is, again, which size to buy, the Fright Props website is really good for that. So I was going to use as an example, you know what, I can't just do that. Hold on. So, for the solenoid, the plumbing on the solenoid, again, these little whips are coming around. Here is going to be your air in from your compressor. It's going to exhaust out the other side to your prop and to the cylinder on your prop. And we're going to talk about that. I always use the dual acting cylinder, so you're going to have it one line going to the top and one line going to the bottom, and the two exhausts are here. So that's basically how it plumbs up. These fittings, I love these push fittings. To put the line in, it's easy. You just slide it right in. You'll feel it lock. It will not come out now until you press down on these, and it comes right out then. Okay? Yeah, Pat, and I think those are the cheapest. The 1/4 inch, 1/4 and 1/8 inch are the cheapest. They're the least expensive solenoids. I think you know they're different sizes you can get, but I think those are the least expensive. So it works well. I like it. Again, just be careful with the thread size. I've seen a lot of people get disappointed buying the solenoids off of eBay, and then they get it and their threads don't work. Now, one possibility, if you're going to mix MPT fittings, US fittings, and the rest of the world fittings, is you can buy universal fittings. They're more expensive than the standard fittings. And I don't know if you can see. Come back here. If you can see right in there, that little black line right there, that's a black washer, neoprene washer or whatever in there. So instead of relying on the threads and the pipe dope or sealant or tape, whatever you're using on here to seal the air, they are actually relying on that little black washer there to seal it. So that's a possibility. I don't use them very much. I'd rather have the right one, but that is a solution. And as you can see, I went that way once before, and it's worked well. Okay. Any questions on that? Cooking recipes? Critiques? All right. Moving right along. Now we get to the fun stuff. This is the part that everybody, sees and thinks about when we're talking about cylinders. And this is the cylinder. Okay, stay there. Let me pull this other one. And they come in a wide variety of sizes, shapes, looks. But this is the primary style that we use with our Halloween props. There's some kind of a cylindrical one like this with 1 or 2 air inlets on there, okay? You can get rotary ones and stuff that are pretty specialized. They have some very good uses for what we do, which just not many people are using those. So this is primarily the size and the style that you're going to work with, okay? Now, just like in the solenoids, you need to make some decisions here. You need to decide on what your stroke length is, how long you need, and that is this isn't the stroke length. A lot of people go, oh, you know, I see it on eBay and it says it's 6 inches, so it's a 6-inch cylinder. No, it is not. It's maybe a 4-inch cylinder because that's all the throw is. So this is the throw right here, what your stroke is, not the body of the cylinder. So you have to be a little careful if you're buying these used on eBay or somewhere else, that you want this distance here, up to the threads. Because this is going to be your stroke length. And then you've got to decide your bore. Anywhere between 3/4 and 1 1/16 are probably the most standard for what we use for most of our props, unless you're pushing a huge load. I know Pat's got one where he's using 1.5 inches. I've got one 2-inch cylinder. It's a monster for my scale erector. But primarily, we're using, like I said, between 7/8, 1 1/16, 3/4. 3/4 is a really common size. In fact, that's what that is. That's what this is. Okay. So, depending on how much you need these to lift is going to determine how big of a cylinder you use. I always go a little bit bigger. Again, I like to build in some extra room. I always go a little bit bigger than I think I'm going to use. Plus, then if I ever pull that cylinder off to use it somewhere else, you know, I've got a little bit more range to use. So, again, somewhere in that range, it works for just about everything we do. And then you need to decide, I know it's a lot, but whether it's going to be single acting, and single acting is just going to have one air port, and this one relies on a spring to bring it back the other way. Okay, you can use the spring. Those work great, especially for pop-ups and stuff where you've got pressure to push it up, then you've got the weight of your prop, whatever, you got the spring pulling it down. You don't necessarily need to have a double acting. Personally, all of mine are double acting cylinders, so you're going to be pushing air in this side and driving this out, and then when I switch my controller, it's going to drive air down into this one, it's going to exhaust out here, and it's going to close. That gives you the most control of your prop, being able to control the air both in and out. Now you can see I've got just the standard push fitting sitting in this one here. What I prefer to do, and we're going to talk more about these, but these are flow controls. So you can put your flow controls on, you can put them either here or on your exhaust, depending on what you like. A lot of mine are on my actual on the prop. And this is going to control the airflow individually into both sides of the cylinder. So I can have this thing go out really fast. Now that I've got it opened up. Go out really fast and then have a slow retract. So go out, make my scare, and then bring it back so it's slower coming back and not banging backwards, which is going to increase the life of my prop if I'm not banging it around so much. So it's really nice to be able to have the dual acting and with flow controls controlling either side independently. And you can really dial in the speed that your cylinder is operating at. And then you still have decisions to make. Once you decide on all of that, you need to decide on the mounting. Now, that is just a nose mount. You've got a threaded spot here where you can mount this cylinder. So if you're doing a monster in a box, monster in a box works fine with this. You're going to have a bracket here holding this. And that will work just like that. If you're going to do anything that's going to pivot, though, a nose mount is just going to be, just the end of the cylinder is going to be just like that. You know, there's nothing to mount it to on the back end, only on the front. But if you want anything where this cylinder is going to be more, you know, in any direction other than what you first mounted in, if scissor prop or anything, a lift prop lifter, this is going to need to rotate to some degree. You're going to need to have a rear mount as well, rear pivot mount. And again, all of my cylinders that I buy are the double acting with the rear pivot mount. That just gives me the most versatility when I'm building a prop now. And if I tear that prop apart and I reuse the cylinder, that's going to give me the most, most options when I go to import this into a different prop. So that's what I like. That works really well for me. And then you can always have, it's always going to have a little bit of tweak in it. It works well. But again, for like my monster in a box, my monster in a box has just got a nose mount that mounts on the side of the box, and it works just fine. So there are certainly plenty of uses. Same thing with the spring returns. There's a lot of places that this works, but I just like to have that added bit of control that I've got by having control of the air in both directions and being able to add the flow controls to it. Once you've decided on all of that, you've ordered your cylinder, you still have to have some way to mount this thing. Now they've got, let's see if I've got a clevis here. There's a nice big one. They have clevises, and this one's not the one that fits on here, but it shows up really good. You'll have a nut on here, and this is threaded here, and it'll thread right on here, giving you a nice anchor point. Okay, so you can purchase these. As far as the rear mount, again, you can purchase these. Just make sure that you write them into your budget when you start trying to figure out how much you're going to, all of this is going to cost you. You do need to figure out all these fittings because they do add up. So, here's the little brackets that you can buy. And let's see if I can do this and hold it all together. So you can mount it up like this onto your post. Usually what I do especially for the back mounts is I'll just use a piece of one of those little 90-degree angles from Home Depot, and they're a whole lot cheaper than these are, and they work just fine. But depending on how you're having to mount this into your prop is going to determine what you're going to need for a bracket. The clevises work really good. I've made a lot of my own, but it's really handy. You may find that it works best for you if you just go and purchase the proper one. Fright Props, again, is very good about telling you which components you need. Another place that I buy a lot of my pneumatic stuff from is Automation Direct. Let's see if I can give you a link for that. It's automationdirect.com. And let's get over to their pneumatics. So most of my stuff, virtually all of my components, come from either Automation Direct or Fright Props. So here's a link to Automation Direct. And then Fright Props is where I get most of my others. I get all my solenoids from Fright Props. And again, one nice thing about Fright Props too is that you can also buy just the electronic portion of it separately, in case you have one that goes bad or burn up, let the blue smoke out of it. You can replace just that component and save the rest of it. So you can, again, like I said, I've made a lot of mine, but if you don't have the tools, you don't have the time, you don't have the desire, just make sure to get a clevis for the front end and some mounting hardware for the back end. So again, when you're starting to budget all of this and trying to figure out the price of a prop, and we're in the process of doing this. I don't know if you guys can see this guy, but this is a guy I'm building. We're going to do an all-day pneumatics class in Dallas at the Halloween and Hauntfest show in August. And yes, Richard, that's why I buy my all my solenoids from Fry Props, because they do have 12 volt. But you know, we were designing. I was designing this for the show, and this is what everybody that comes to the all-day seminar, in addition to having the seminar, is they're going to leave, you know, with a working prop. And the big thing was trying to figure out a way to design one out of aluminum instead of steel like I usually build in, and because we have people that are flying in and they need to be able to dismantle this and not use up their entire 50-pound suitcase allowance. So this guy is actually, we designed one just for a light pop-up out of aluminum. He seems to be holding up really well. But, you know, we were going through and starting to add up the price of everything, and it's like every fitting, every component, it really adds up, and people forget the fittings and they forget the attachments. So and they can be significant. They, you know, you can spend another $20 in addition to your solenoid and your cylinder just on parts. And if you're using flow controls, which I'll talk about in a little bit. Again, if you're using flow controls, it gets even a little more expensive. So just make sure to add that into your budget. Any questions on cylinders before I move on? Again, I'm trying to get done in my hour and covering a lot of ground. Okay, so the next thing is, now we've got a compressor that can pump air out to my solenoid, that can send air to my cylinder, but how do I get everything connected together? And we talked a little bit already about the push fittings, you know, where you just air lines fit right in here. You need to decide again what size. I use 1/4 inch line going from my manifolds, and we'll talk about that here in a minute, to each individual prop. My main lines running off of my compressors, though, are 3/8. So I have big spools of 3/8, line that runs from my compressor, runs out into the yard, into a central portion in the yard, and it goes into some kind of a manifold or a splitter. Now these are really nice. I do use these in line along my back fence, where I have, you know, a prop here, and then, you know, you go down the fence line another 15 feet, there's another one, and so on down the line. You can get a variety of splitters. So I've got my 3/8 inch line coming in here, and then going out this way again down to the next prop. And then I've got 1/4 inch going from that main line up into that pneumatic. Now, this one I happen to be using, of course it's not going to have these plugs in it. And I only needed 2 of the lines, so they have these neat little plugs that you can just plug one of them up with, and it seals it up. So you can get these in a variety of different styles. You can get splitters, you can get 4-ways, however you want, but I like these. Again, I've got these are 3/8 main line and 1/4 inch here going to each individual prop. So I've got that. Now I've got my air line coming out to my cylinder, out to my solenoids. And where did I put it? Who took it? And before I send my air line into each individual prop, each of my props has got its own regulator on it. I'm going to be running the air out of my compressor at probably 100 psi, but not every prop, in fact, none of my props better, need that much air to run on. So each individual prop gets dialed in with the amount of air that they need. And you don't want to be using any more air than you need to, so each one of them has its own regulator in line before it gets to the solenoid. So we talked a little bit. You're going to have your solenoid, your air line coming out or coming in, and then these two lines are going to go to either side of your cylinder. And again, the cylinders have the same connectors on them. So if you're using flow controls, you've got two options. You can do the exhaust. You can put flow controls on the exhaust. What did I do? Use both the ones I had on the other one? Or you can use the one that's going to go into the cylinder. Again, just depending on what works best for you. Usually I do all of mine on my cylinders, just because when I'm tweaking a prop, you know, especially one that's got multiple cylinders on, it's easier for me to do them all right there at the character instead of going down the line to where my solenoids are. So that's how I prefer. Just make sure you get the exhaust. You want, what you're trying to do is regulate the exhaust. So you're going to have that on each of these, and then of course you're going to have these plugging into here. Now, I could go into A and B and which one is the right one, but when you energize the cylinder, if you want it down when it's energized and it pops up instead, all you got to do is reverse the lines. Okay, that's all you have to do. You don't have to go back and trace anything or figure out what you did wrong. Just all you do is replumb it the opposite direction, and then it'll be right. Okay, so not to complicate it any more than it needs to be. So that's your actual plumbing process with all the fittings. And then on the end, of course, I'm going to have a fitting that's going to plug into my compressor. Okay, so it's going to have one of these on there. Now I use, again, the line I use is polyurethane line versus the polyethylene line. You can use cheaper airline. You know, and I've used it. I've used this brown sprinkler line from the plumbing section at Home Depot. I've used the clear line, just the tubing, but I have had that clear tubing blow up on me and fail on me twice. Now I know I'm in San Diego, and I know Halloween, we've had 85, 88 degrees setting up on Halloween day. So, you know, those airlines are sitting out in the heat. I know Pat doesn't have that problem to deal with. But ever since I've switched over to the polyurethane line, I have not had a problem. It's worked fantastic. So I get mine at Automation Direct. I buy it in 100-foot spools from Automation Direct, and I just restocked because I'm just about this little piece I'm using as a demo as my last piece of my roll. So, you know, I usually keep a roll of this and a roll of the 3/8 around, and that's where I get it from. I think this 100-foot spool of 1/4 inch is $19 at Automation Direct. So just to give you some idea. Okay. We talked about the different pipe fittings. Make sure you get the right ones. We talked about flow controls and the mufflers. Oh, I'm sure somebody's curious, so we'll go over. Again, my flow control is going to be back down here. Gosh darn, get rid of that electrical wire. They're going to both be mounted on my cylinder. But where your air is exhausting, one of the big complaints, of course, with pneumatics is they're noisy. And usually that noise is going to be the air exhaust that's going to bother most people. So they do have mufflers, silencers that all work to varying degrees. I've tried silencers. They haven't silenced the air escape for me, but they will bring it down. One other option that you've got, if you're really concerned and you really don't want that air sound right there at your prop, is to run It's easy enough. Instead of putting your silencer or your muffler here on the solenoid, is to just put a regular push fitting in it, and then take your air line, plug this in, and again, this is the exhaust, and put this as far as you away from your prop as you want, so that it's out in your backyard or behind your facade or whatever. But this is well out away from where your patrons are, and that will help alleviate the sound. So, like my Pirate Pete that's up on that big box, his exhaust lines go down into that box into a big pile of towels. So you can hear the servos with him, but at least you're not hearing the exhaust from the pneumatics. So that's another way to deal with the sound issue and reduce the sound of it a bit, if that really bothers you. Or you can just use that. Sometimes the sound, the air from the pneumatics provides an additional scare. So, it can be useful too, depending on how you lay out your haunt. Extend the exhaust lines. I think that's everything I wanted to go on that. Now, another thing as far as mounting all of this and reducing the amount of air lines that you've got running and how to add more air lines if you need it. There are varying styles of manifolds. And I do want to give a warning. They have these at Harbor Freight and they have them at Home Depot. They are more expensive at Home Depot. Buy them at Home Depot. I don't buy any fittings from Harbor Freight now unless it's a dire emergency. I've had too many of them that have leaked or failed, been cracked. Maybe they were cracked because I got on them with a wrench. But, I've had problems with those fittings. So I get mine from Home Depot. So each of my compressors has got one of these manifolds on it. So this is just a 3-way manifold. So it comes like this. So coming right off of my compressor, I have one of these mounted. And then I've got 3 of these screwed in so that I can go in 3 different directions and run air lines. Just like the one on the side of my house, I've got air lines going to the front. I've got air lines going to the back. So this allows me up to 3. In that case, I'm only using 2 of them. But it allows me 3. And to plug that into the female side is I've got a male fitting that's going to fit right in there with and this one is a female fitting. Let's see if we can pull out a couple. This little adapter is made up of, excuse me, a female fitting with the male one that plugs in, and that will never attach and hold air. And that screws in right there. I'll use one of these that's got 3/8. So this is going to be my main 3/8 inch line that's going to go down to each individual area where I'm going to separate them out to the props. But that's how I connect them at my compressor, using one of these kind of manifolds. And one thing, if you're shopping, like everything else that we're talking about tonight, you have to make sure that if you're going to play with apples, always get apples. Even at Home Depot, these are in several different styles. They've got, I think they call it the automotive one and the universal one. So make sure if you're getting the universal from this side, you get the universal for this side. Okay, don't mix. So just make sure that you're buying compatible products when you're doing that. All right, any questions on that? Any thoughts? Cooking recipes? Nope. As you can see, I'm not drinking scotch tonight. I had a medical procedure and I am on heavy antibiotics and my stomach won't allow me to drink tonight. So, although Will did stop by to visit, I don't think he's come in here, and brought beer. So I did have a little bit of liquid painkiller to go going into the day. So Another style of manifold that's really useful, especially if you're building a prop that uses multiple solenoids. Instead of having air run into this one, then an air line going over to this one, is you can buy a manifold like this. This is a 4-way manifold. And then mount all of your solenoids on top of it. This really helps clean it up. Unfortunately, I don't have a video, but if you saw that picture that was that I put in the announcement for tonight's site, it's using 8 cylinders, so it's got 2 banks of these like this. So I've got another one downstream, and it just really helps clean things up and makes it a lot easier to plumb everything using a manifold. So those are manifolds. What are we doing on time? Oh, like always, I'm running late. It's nice to make a variety of different little fittings. This is one I use a lot. We're going to talk about auxiliary tanks, but at the end of the season, I want to drain my auxiliary tanks. And so if I put one of these into that fitting, and it's got another one on the other end, you can guess what the air is going to do. So it's going to drain out. So I always have these. So when I want to be done with my air tanks, I just put that in and vent it out and close it out. The way I've got my tank set up, that's the best way to evacuate the air. So, I always have a couple of those made up. And again, having these things made up in advance before you need them on Halloween night is really handy. And one thing, whenever I'm buying components for any of this stuff, is I'm always trying to buy extras. So this is one of 2 boxes of fittings that I keep on hand. So whenever I want to go out and work on a design, or I have something fail, I've always got the fitting I need. And so when I'm ordering, I just always order a few spares and then have them on hand so that I'm not scouring the city trying to find them when I need them. All right, manifolds. We talked about regulators. The regulator that I showed you, this is one thing I've been buying from Harbor Freight because they're cheap, but they're also prone to failure. I've had a couple of these fail on me. Again, I'm using 15 of them or 18 of them, whatever. So every year it seems like one goes down. I always just make sure I have a couple of spares, but they're really cheap at Harbor Freight. If you buy them at Home Depot, they're 20 to 30 bucks. And I think you can get them at Harbor Freight and use the coupon and get them for $4 or $5. So my thought is, I'll just use the Harbor Freight ones, and if one does fail, I'll go and throw on a new one and throw that out. But my spares are all already plumbed. Again, they're going to come without these fittings on them. So my spares are already built, ready to go like this. So if I have one go bad, I just pull the old one off, stick a new one on. It's a 30-second fix, and that prop is back up and running. So again, try to do as much preparation as you can. You don't want to be sitting there with Teflon tape or seam sealant and at 8 o'clock when you've got 200 kids sitting out in front of you, demanding candy. So having it ready to go is certainly the best way to go. And my feeling is if I'm not ready, I will certainly need it. If I have the part sitting in reserve, I'll never have to use it. So anyway, yeah, Harbor fail. Yeah, I know, Tim. So. But again, this has to be figured into your budget when you're starting to design this, whether you're going to spend $5 or $6 at Home Depot or at Harbor Freight and a couple fittings, or if you're going to spend $25 getting one of the ones from Home Depot. It needs to be budgeted. And again, you want to have one of these on each prop because you've got that main line. Again, if you're only having one prop and you're using a pancake compressor and it uses 40 pounds of pressure, you can just set your compressor at 40 pounds and it's only running that one prop, and it's great. It'll be fine. But the problem arises when you've got one that uses 40 and one that needs 60. You know, you want to be able to dial each individual prop in with just enough air for them to operate. You know, you don't want to waste any air, and you don't want them banging any harder than they have to. So it's nice to be able to control the air going into each prop individually and then fine-tune it with the flow controls. Okay. And we talked about airline. Again, I would avoid that clear airline. I know a lot of guys use it, and I used it for several years before I had a problem, but then I had one year, again, it was very hot here in San Diego. We were setting up in the high 80s on Halloween Day, and I had two of those airlines go. One as I was setting up, and then one in the middle of Halloween blow out. And that was exciting, so don't want to do that again. As far as fittings are concerned, I don't know if there's anything else you need me to cover. If you're buying parts, a couple other fittings that are useful. And I want to talk about that. One, again, make sure you need, whether you need the females or the males. Okay, they're the same ones, but make sure you know which one you get and order the right one. A couple other things that are really useful, they've got adapters that you can use to extend lines. So if you run out of line or you're trying to extend a line out, these are really nice and handy to have. I don't know about you, but I always end up 5 feet short. So, you know, I got to splice something in. So it's really easy to do these and use these little splice connectors. So, those are nice to have. You know, I have them in 1/4 and 3/8 for both of the airlines that I use. And another one that's handy, at least for me, is this is a 3/8 to 1/4. So the last prop in my line, again, I'm going to have 3/8 coming out here, and this is going to go to the last prop in the line, and I want 1/4 inch line going to him. It's nice to have that reducer. So that's a handy fitting to have. And I talked about all the splitters, the plugs. Again, if you're going to be using manifolds, being able to have some 1/4s and some 3/8 inch plugs comes in handy. And we talked about the different fittings. I think that's all. That's all I had for that. Any questions? Oh, thank you, Pat. Where's my cutter? Yes. Make sure when you get the airline and you're getting ready to put this into whatever prop you have. I see guys doing this all the time. They take out their trusty dikes out of their tool belt and they go like that. And they cut it, and it is a crooked cut. It doesn't seat well into the fitting, and then they get air leaks, and they wonder why they're getting air leaks. This is the best, I don't know what they are now, $5 you can spend if you're going to be buying tools for pneumatics. This is just a little cutter, and the line just goes in there, and it's perfect every time. It doesn't squish it. It gives you a nice square cut, and it fits down into that fitting just perfectly. So when you're buying your first setup, make sure to throw one of these in your shopping cart. Okay? Upside down. And you'll get nice straight cuts. Thank you, Pat. I forgot about that. What else is on my table that I haven't talked about? Yes, I think that's all. A couple little odds and ends. We always get the question about auxiliary tanks. Can I get a little compressor and go to Harbor Freight and buy the 5 or the 11-gallon air tanks and fill all of those up with air? And will that get me by? Well, yes and no. I use air tanks. I have 4 or 5 air tanks that I use, or 6, in my haunt. I use 3 of them inside my house because I don't want airlines snaking all the way through my house. I've got scissor prop at the end of one hallway. I've got my grandfather clock. I've got my pop-up in the coffin. And they each run on an 11-gallon tank, and I can set my controllers that they will get through the entire night on that 11 gallons of air that is in that tank. So they're standalone props being run off of that, but smaller cylinders, and they don't activate a whole lot, so they get through. So for that, the auxiliary tanks are great. Fill them up at the beginning of the night, and then I refill them again for the next night. So that's one potential use for them. The other use is, though, if you are trying to use auxiliary tanks to extend the volume of air that your compressor has. Yes, it will. Beginning of the night, say you've got 2 or 3 of those tanks in there, and you've got another 33 gallons of air out there, and it will take a long time for those to get burned through, depending on how many props and what props you've got. But that will add to whatever the reservoir on your compressor is, and give you more initial air. The only problem is when it does drain your compressor tank down and your compressor re-kicks back in, it's going to be running for a long time to get all of those tanks filled up, plus its own reservoir, and you can burn out your compressor again. Because they're not designed to run for that much time. So it is a bit of a trade-off. I do have a main, I have 2 out in my yard, tanks that go to the props that use a lot of air. That one I used in the announcement with 8 cylinders in there, he uses quite a bit of air. So I've got one of those big tanks that's, right there 5 feet away from him, so that he's always got plenty of air to get through his routine. And but just remember that it is a trade-off. It's not just free air. You can't get a pancake compressor, add 2 tanks, and say, now I have a 27-gallon compressor. No, you do not really have you still got that little tiny compressor that's going to have to keep those tanks filled, and they're really going to have to work to do that. So just be careful with that. And if you burn up a compressor, and I have burned up one, like Pat says, convert it into air storage. I had one of the rolling ones, and the motor finally cooked on it. It was the one that I had even before I started with Halloween. So I just pulled the motor off and put some new fittings on it, and now it's a rolling air tank that comes in really handy. I use it every year. So you can repurpose those compressors as storage tanks into your haunt. So don't just throw them away. Use what you can and take advantage of that. One way to get a little bit of extra oomph out of your out of your whole system with pneumatics is to add springs to help with the pneumatics, especially to get them started. A lot of the pop-ups, you see the coffin pop-ups, my flying witch, which is got a very short pivot point on that witch. There isn't a whole lot of, if my bars are here, and this is the witch down here, my pivot point is not very high from where that cylinder is going to make that connection. And it has the only problem it has is getting started. Once it gets started, it's great. So I've got a spring attached in line with my cylinder to just help it get that first little punch up. And that's been really successful, and it's allowed me to use a smaller cylinder than I would have to use without the spring. So that's one thing that you might do, is use that. Same with the pop-ups. A lot of the pop-ups in the coffin where you've got the guy laying flat down. The hard part is getting him started up. So by adding a spring to that to help with that lift just at the very beginning of the stroke, can really help and make that look a lot better. I talked about purchasing and where to buy things. Again, all my stuff, or for the most part, comes from either Automation Direct or from Fright Props. eBay is certainly a good source, but again, remember you're buying used, not new, no warranties, all of that stuff, and it's really buyer beware out there sometimes, and you really have to know what you want and what to look for when you're shopping on eBay. I would not recommend that, at least to get started. Once you get an idea of what you need and what you use, it can certainly work a lot better. But that's not where I would start, is eBay. A lot of great deals out there, and I certainly don't mind if somebody comes and competes with me on, you know, those. Tim and I have competed for different different sales already, but that's just fine. So 100-gallon blow at the upholstery shop. Wow. I would not want to be around when that thing goes off. Unfortunately, I don't even have a 100-gallon. I would love a 240 compressor, you know, about 60-gallon, 220 compressor, but I'm not adding more power. I already had to run dedicated lines to run my 110 compressors. So, and again, that's another thing you need to check, whether you want a 110 or 220. You're going to get a lot more oomph out of the 220s, but you need the extra electrical service, so make sure you've got it. Okay. Oh man, I'm already over an hour, and I've got a couple things left to do. Alternatives. What say you watched all of this, what we just talked about, and say, boy, that's really cool, but it's not for me. Do I have any other options to get that fast punch like we get from pneumatics without having to use air? You know, can I use a motor or servo? And there aren't, you know, those don't work for that fast punch, and that's why we love pneumatics, is because we love, you know, that very fast scare punch. But there are a couple alternatives. And these work really well, even if you use pneumatics. And I don't know if you guys have, I think most of you have seen, is these little 12-volt door lock actuators. And I've got it, this happens to be a 4-channel relay board. Let's see if we can get some juice to it. And with a little wireless remote, and I've just got it on momentary, but again, this is great for a little monster in a box or something. Of course, I am having to do it to control it here, but these are really cool. They're really cheap. In fact, right now, Electronics Gold Mine, I'll post the link, has got these on sale for a couple of days for $3. They're usually $6.25. They're a little different than the ones I'm showing here, but I've bought stuff from these guys before and been very happy with them. I don't see why these would not be good as well. But I think that sale runs for a couple more days. Get them on Amazon. I think you can get them 2 for $10 or something on Amazon. At least you used to be able to. So that's one alternative, to use something other than pneumatics that doesn't use air. But it's not the only choice. If you want, don't kill myself here, this is another alternative. High-speed linear actuators. And Fright Props has got these, and they work really well. I've got a leaper that I use this one on. And I think this is the largest one that Fright Props has got. And it works really well. It's really quick in comparison to the other linear actuators. But like anything else, it's not cheap. This one, I think all their 3 high-speed linear actuators are $150. But if you're only going to do one, and you don't want to do air, certainly an option to go this route. One thing, if you're going to get these, make sure to get the big power supplies. You know, we talked last week about the wiper motors needing 5 amps. These take 10 amps. So get the big power supply to run those, because they will, let me tell you, they will not run on 5 volts. At least mine will. So they really, or 5 amps. They're 12 volt, but they do need the 10 amps. So those are a couple options if you don't want to use pneumatics, but you want that kind of linear motion. Is Jim on? Jim Jones wanted us to talk a little bit about controllers, and that's really a whole nother subject, but one of the easiest ways to program if you've just got a simple one is to use a button banger. This just happens to be the one I build. It's a 2-channel one. Tim's Scuba Spooks 4-channel one is great to be able to use, as is, the Fright Props. All of the Fright Props lines, the little peekaboos and stuff, are great little controllers to be able to use. For the show in August in Dallas, when they build this initial prop, they're going to leave, okay, come back here. They're going to leave with a, I don't even know where it went, a little 2-channel wireless remote. So it's going to be, that's what's going to come with the prop. We're also going to do another class. We're doing 2 more classes, 2 1-hour classes, one on programming and one on putting a controller together and actually loading a program onto it. And we're going to be using the little pickaxe controllers, motor controllers. They're about $10, and so you'll get an idea how to do a little bit of programming, just enough to make a pop-up work, and a PIR for a trigger. So those are a couple of things. Those little pickaxes, and you guys that follow me know that pickaxe is my controller of choice, mainly because I am not a software programmer. I learned all this off the internet, just like you guys are doing here, and it was the easiest coding language I could find out there that to do and learn. So that's what I use. So that's how we're going to be doing it for ours. So couple notes before I sign off. Next week, we're going to be at 6 o'clock again. Going to move an hour later for starting time. I apologize for that, but I am taking my wife to a show and at a matinee, so I cannot get back in time for 5 o'clock. So we'll start at 6 next week, but it's a special show I think you're going to want to tune into. We're not going to be here in my workshop. We are actually going to be over at my son Brian's office. Some of you guys know Brian. Brian does all of my photography for me. He's a professional photographer. Has his own photography business and also does photography for a big real estate company here in San Diego. So we're going to be in his office, being able to see his computer, some of his editing stuff. He's going to talk cameras. He's going to talk about, how to take good haunt video. He and I share a lot of the same ideas about how to film video, and he'll show you some of the tips and secrets of how he films ours, so that you're not just getting a black screen and hearing screaming in the background. So that's what we're going to be doing next week at Brian's studio, or in his office. Get to see his green screen and the whole shooting match. So that'll be what we're going to be doing next week. So if you have questions for Brian about photography, video, or stills, he does both, and drone, and boom, and steady cams, or any of that stuff. He's got all of that stuff. He uses it all in his professional job. He'll be happy to answer any of your questions. And of course, we'll both be there, but that's the show for next week. So if there aren't any more questions, then guys, I'm going to sign off for tonight, and I will see you next week at Brian's studio. All right, take care. Good night, guys.